Have you ever picked up a stranger on a desolate road? Picture this, a road desolate and quiet, stretching into the vast darkness under the bellowing storm clouds. It's a road less travelled, a path seldom chosen. Imagine, if you will, the howling wind, a mournful symphony of nature that echoes through the night. It dances with the relentless rain, each droplet crashing onto the windshield, a drumbeat to the rhythm of the storm. This is the scene of our tale. Here I am, a weary traveller, steering my way through the tempest, a speck of life amid the untamed wilderness. The journey is long, the road is lonely, and the night, well, it's as dark as a raven's feather. The only light comes from the occasional flash of lightning, illuminating the path ahead, a fleeting glimpse into the unknown. Then, out of nowhere, a figure emerges from the shadows, a lone hitchhiker. He stands there, a silhouette against the storm, as if he's a part of the night itself. There's an air of mystery about him, a sense of intrigue that's hard to ignore, but there's also something unsettling, something that sends a chill down my spine. Despite my better judgment, I decide to offer him a lift. I tell myself it's the humane thing to do, to offer shelter to a fellow traveller on this stormy night. But as I pull over, a sense of unease creeps over me. There's a voice in the back of my mind, a nagging whisper that tells me this might not be a wise decision. But I push it aside, quelling the rising tide of apprehension. As I roll down the window, the cold air rushes in, carrying with it the scent of the rain-soaked earth. The hitchhiker's face, half lit by the dim glow of the dashboard, is a mask of gratitude and relief. But there's something else there too, something hidden in the depths of his eyes. And so, with a sense of foreboding, I opened the car door to the stranger. As the stranger climbed into my car, I couldn't help but wonder about his story. His eyes, though weary, held a flicker of something I couldn't place. Intrigued, I invited him to share his journey. With a nod he began. His words flowed like a meandering stream, starting with benign tales of the road. He spoke of chance encounters with wayward travellers and shared a laugh about a raccoon rummaging through his belongings one night. He spun tales of breathtaking sunsets over endless fields and the peaceful solitude of starry nights. Each story, each memory painted a vivid tapestry of a life lived on the open road. They were stories of freedom, of wanderlust, of a spirit untamed by the confines of modern life. But as the miles stretched on, his tales took a curious turn. He started speaking of shadows that danced in the corner of his eyes. He mentioned whispers carried by the wind, words of an unknown language that seemed to echo in his ears long after the wind had died down. He talked about peculiar towns where the clocks ran backward and of forest trails where the trees seemed to breathe. His stories were no longer just anecdotes of the road, but whispers of the inexplicable, the uncanny. I listened, entranced yet sceptical. The world he painted was strange, but not entirely frightening. There was a certain charm in the unknown, a thrill in the unexplained. His voice, steady and calm, weaved a tapestry of the peculiar that was difficult to dismiss outright. Yet as the night grew darker, a sense of unease began to creep in. His tales, once filled with light-hearted humour and awe-inspiring beauty, now hinted at something more. They were no longer just tales of the road, but echoes of a world that lurked just beyond the ordinary, a world that was slowly revealing itself in his words. But as the night wore on, his tales took a darker turn. His stories began to unsettle me, each one darker than the last. The air in the car seemed to grow colder as his tales unfolded, a chilling counterpoint to the storm raging outside. There was the story of the abandoned child, left to fend for herself in the wilderness, only to be taken in by a pack of wolves. The tale of the lighthouse keeper, driven mad by solitude and the ceaseless pounding of the waves, who threw himself from the tower into the churning sea below. And the account of the village that disappeared overnight, leaving only empty homes and a haunting silence. His voice, a gravelly whisper, painted vivid pictures that danced in the dim light of the dashboard. Each story was more unsettling than the last, filled with disturbing events and terrifying encounters. I found myself holding my breath, caught in the grip of his narratives. But it was more than just the stories themselves. There was a certain familiarity in his voice, a hint of relish that made my skin crawl. As if he wasn't just a passive observer, but an active participant in these dark tales. I could almost see his eyes, hidden in the shadows, gleaming with perverse satisfaction. A cold knot of dread began to form in the pit of my stomach. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that they were just stories, mere fiction spun by a stranger on a stormy night. But the creeping sense of uneasiness refused to be dismissed. Was there a chilling truth behind these stories? Had this hitchhiker, this stranger in my car, lived through these sinister events? His next tale wasn't just chilling, it was personal. His voice, crackling like the static of an old radio, began to weave a story that was all too familiar. A tale of a young boy, lost in the woods during a family camping trip. The fear, the desperation, the relief of being found. This was my story, my secret, a memory buried deep within the catacombs of my past that I had shared with no one. The rain beat against the car windows, drumming a relentless rhythm that heightened the sense of foreboding. His voice continued to narrate my past. The words echoed in the confined space of the car, bouncing off the windscreen and back into my ears. A shiver crept up my spine, uninvited. This was no ordinary hitchhiker. This was no ordinary night. His story continued, each word a hammer blow to my sense of reality. His knowledge of my past was unsettling. His presence in my car was terrifying. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles turning ghostly white against the dim glow of the dashboard lights. My heart pounded in my chest like a wild drum, matching the rhythm of the rain against the glass. There was a sense of dread that filled the car, thick as the fog that had begun to creep in around us. I could feel it, taste it, it was palpable. The hitchhiker seemed oblivious to my discomfort, or perhaps he was simply indifferent. He sat there, a shadowy figure in my passenger seat, a spectre from a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. How did he know? Was it a lucky guess? Or was there something more sinister at play? My mind raced with questions, fear and confusion, wrestling for dominance. I wanted to stop the car, to demand answers, but we were miles away from the nearest town, lost in a sea of darkness and pouring rain. The realization hit me like a bolt of lightning, electrifying every nerve in my body. I was no longer just a listener, I was part of his twisted tale. With a sinking feeling, I realized I was not alone in my fear. The atmosphere in the car had shifted from uneasy camaraderie to a palpable tension. It was as if the very air had thickened, making each breath a conscious effort. The hitchhiker's stories, once intriguing, had taken a turn for the sinister, and his last tale. It ended so abruptly, it was as if he'd snuffed out a candle, leaving us in the chilling afterglow of his words. The silence that followed was oppressive, the only soundtrack to our journey, the merciless patter of rain against the car's exterior and the distant rumble of thunder. It seemed to echo the unease that had settled in my heart. I could see the hitchhiker's reflection in the rearview mirror, a silent spectre framed by the dim cabin light. His gaze was fixed on something outside the window, his expression unreadable. And then, without warning, the car's headlights flickered. Once, twice, before dying out completely. I pounded on the dashboard, hoping to jolt them back to life, but they remained unresponsive. The engine followed suit, the car sputtering to a halt as if it too had been affected by the hitchhiker's haunting tales. The rain pounded on the roof, the sound amplified by the silence inside the car. We were stranded on a desolate road in the middle of a storm, with a stranger whose stories had taken on a life of their own. The hitchhiker turned to look at me, his eyes reflecting the faint glimmer of the dying dashboard lights. His last chilling words, still hanging in the air, seemed to take on a new, more sinister meaning. The last flickers of light from the dashboard died out, plunging the car into an abyss of darkness. The silence was deafening, the tension unbearable. As the car plunged into darkness, I was left wondering, would this be my final tale?